Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up, and other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Monday to you. Although the news is kind of grim, I guess the one happy part is John Bolton just tweeted out that he's willing to testify if the Senate subpoenas him. Of course, Mitch McConnell is saying, we're not going to have a trial. We're going to have a cover-up. You know, we're not going to talk. We don't want to hear from any witnesses. We don't want to look at any evidence. Just, get Jim Jordan out there to make his little rant and we'll vote. So we'll see where that goes. But meanwhile, Donald Trump seems like he is hell-bent for leather to take us to war. And this is very concerning. And there's a bunch of news around this that I want to talk about, including a couple of things that are absolutely not being covered in American media that I think are really, really vital. But, the bottom line here, in my opinion, is that Donald Trump has officially kicked off his reelection campaign. He did it just like Nixon did with Vietnam, Reagan did with Grenada, Bush 1 did with Iraq, and Bush 2 did with both Afghanistan and Iraq. In every case, they followed Margaret Thatcher's suggestion that if you want to get your popularity up so you can get yourself reelected, and it worked for Maggie Thatcher. She was in the tank after she went after the coal miners union, the largest union in the UK. And then, she had her little war in the Falklands, and suddenly her popularity was over 70%. Reagan did the same thing with Grenada, and all of us, you saved those American students who didn't know that they needed to be saved. Bush 1, they're throwing babies out of incubators. Turns out they weren't. But we've got to support our buddy, the Emir of Kuwait. And so that started the mess in Iraq. And by the way, at that point in time in Iraq, women had rights. They were doctors and lawyers and college professors and teachers and news reporters and right across the board. Now they're wearing burqas and stuff. I mean, it's insane. And Iran's influence is going to make it even worse. But every single one of them said, well, let's have a little war to get reelected. In fact, George W. Bush even bragged to his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, back in 1999, that if he became president, he was going to have a real war with Iraq that would help him get reelected and accomplish everything he wanted. So Trump is just following this. Trump, you'll recall, in 2012 was tweeting like crazy that Obama was going to do that. But Democrats don't do that. Bill Clinton didn't do that. In fact, you could say, that when he got into the whole mess with Kosovo, that he had waited way too long. But Clinton didn't have a little war to get reelected. Obama didn't have a little war to get reelected, at least to the best of my knowledge. Jimmy Carter is the only president in my lifetime not to have had any war anywhere. Maybe Dwight Eisenhower too, but I think you could argue that Eisenhower actually was on the down low, supporting some wars down south. But here it is. I think that and for Trump, this is a twofer. Not only does it give him the boost that you get from being a wartime president, which, he was predicting Obama would do, but from his point of view, it's a way of punishing America for impeaching him. And he loves to punish people. And now Mitch McConnell is saying, well, we're going to pass a resolution in the Senate that says that if Nancy Pelosi doesn't give us the articles of impeachment within 25 days, by the way, it was 19 days ago that they voted on it. If she doesn't give us the articles within 25 calendar days, we don't have to consider them. There won't be a trial. Right. How's that going to work out? So, is this going to work for him? Is this going to work for Trump? Some say no, but get ready for the rally around the flag effect. In fact, we're already seeing this in the media, and it's the media that sets us up for these things. You'll recall, during the run-up to the Iraq War, Phil Donahue had the top-rated show on MSNBC, the #1 show on MSNBC, and he was talking about how we should not fight a war in Iraq. NBC fired him. Jeff Cohen, who was his executive producer at the time for that TV program, has been on this program numerous times talking about that. Bill Maher had a show on ABC, and he also was saying we shouldn't be going to war, and with Iraq, and he lost his show too. But here's the difference. Reagan's little war with Grenada, it cost very little money, and there was no hangover. George Herbert Walker Bush's little war, his 100-hour war with Iraq, well, that set up an ongoing festering problem because of the sanctions. 500,000 children died because they forbade the importation of chlorine into Iraq because it could be used as a nerve gas or as a poison gas. Well, it's also used to purify water. So, for a decade, children in Iraq were drinking water out of the Euphrates through the public water systems that had not been chlorinated, and they were dying of dysentery. 500,000 of them. And then, of course, that set up all kinds of problems, which Junior took care of. So, this is a very, and then Junior's wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, we've been there 17 years. I mean, these are the longest wars in the history of the United States. Great for the military-industrial complex. You can bet that Trump and all his family members and buddies were all buying defense stocks. Raytheon's is up 4%. I'll get to that in a second. But this Sunday there were there's these 5 major talk shows: NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox, basically. Arguably on MSNBC. They featured 7 elected officials who publicly supported and voted for the Iraq War. And not a single person who voted against the Iraq War. Not one. The only person who had spoken out against the Iraq War was Chris Van Hollen. He was interviewed on Fox, but he was not a senator at the time, so he couldn't vote on it. So here we have all these guys on the Sunday shows who were all gung-ho for the Iraq War. And then, to make it even more bizarre, on Meet the Press, Jay Johnson, who was the Secretary of Homeland Security in the Obama administration, he says that Trump has the full legal authority to assassinate Soleimani without authorization from Congress. Now, the one thing that NBC did not disclose when he was on this program, and by the way, right after he said this, the Trump campaign retweeted it. Jay Johnson, Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, says Trump had the total legal authority, right? But what NBC didn't disclose is that Jay Johnson currently is on the board of directors of Lockheed Martin. He was paid $310,000 last year in cash and stock compensation. And his stock that he owns went up 4.3% on Friday after the stock, Lockheed Martin stock, even while the overall stock market was collapsing. And then, Tim Murtaugh he's the communications director for the Trump campaign. He says, Dems and the hysterical media hope this clears that up. And then he retweets, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson debunked Democrats' claim that Congress needs to approve Soleimani strike. Now, Bush and Cheney tried to link Saddam Hussein to al-Qaeda because the authorization to use military force from 2002 says that, or maybe it was 2001, says that the president can make decisions without consulting Congress He has to tell Congress within a certain number of days, but he doesn't have to consult them in advance, that have to do with anything surrounding 9/11, basically. And so Cheney says, well, you know, we're using that authorization for military force. We can invade Iraq because back in 2001, there was a senior Iraqi intelligence official who met in I think it was Prague with some guy from Al-Qaeda. Well, that ended up getting debunked. It had, you know, the reality was that Saddam Hussein was actually actively killing Al-Qaeda people because he saw them as terrorists. He opposed Al-Qaeda. He was running a secular government in Iraq. Al-Qaeda wanted a religious government, which, by the way, is what you have now. So then, you know, Friday night, Mike Pence, reliable toady, does the same thing. He says, assisted in the clandestine travel to Afghanistan of 10 of the 12 terrorists who carried out the September 11 terrorist attacks in the United States. Right, Soleimani, he's saying. There's actually no evidence of this. The 9/11 Commission report says nothing. Soleimani's name does not appear anywhere in it. And it unequivocally says, quote, there is no evidence Iran was involved in 9/11. Now, yeah, some of the hijackers traveled through Iran, which is what Pence was saying. But that was long before the plot was organized. This was back when they were just guys. Of course, it was Mike Pence who, on the floor of the House of Representatives in 2004, said, and I quote, weapons of mass destruction have been found. By the way, you'll find a great summary of this over in Judd Legum's newsletter at popular.info. And it turns out that Trump was given multiple options. So do you think that Trump's reelection strategy and his anti-impeachment strategy is going to work? Or is this going to backfire on him? It looks so far, particularly given that the Sunday shows all had basically gung-ho for war types of people. Yeah, they were talking about, well, maybe we need to be more careful, and I'm not sure this is a great idea. But at the, you know, and then Jay Johnson working for Lockheed Martin saying, oh, yeah, this would be a great idea. Is this going to work? What do you think? We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, and Pence got the number of hijackers wrong, too. There were 19, not 12. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Yeah, this strategy isn't going to work with me because back on Friday, I already contacted my senators and representative and urged them to expand the articles of impeachment to include this act of war against two countries at once without any authorization from Congress. Unless the first article of the Constitution has been altered without my knowledge, this is a congressional authority, and it is not shared with the executive. Trump, since this, has claimed that he gave notice to Congress by a tweet, and that was legal notice which he wasn't required to give,
right,
which translates to, well, it's the law, but I don't have to follow it.
Right.
So this is clearly an impeachable offense. And
I agree.
I've also been hearing that someone in the funeral for Soleimani, who, by the way, worked with us against Al-Qaeda back 20 years ago, yep, and has been working against ISIS. Oh, lately.
Soleimani's forces in Iraq. I think it's called the Popular Front. That paramilitary group in Iraq, which is supported by Soleimani, number one, came to the defense of the U.S. Embassy when it was attacked. And number two, they've been attacking Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Iraq very, very effectively for years now.
Right. Meanwhile, someone at the funeral said there would be an $80 million bounty on Trump's head. If I were Trump, I would avoid congressional Republicans because that's probably a lot more than Putin's paying them.
Yeah. There you go. So, but you said this is not going to fool you, Mike. My question was, do you think it's going to, is he going to get 50% popular support for this thing in the United States? Because if so, he gets reelected.
50%, I tend to doubt it over time.
Yeah.
As more facts come out.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I think it's going to take more than just more facts. I'm very concerned about this. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. I just, the other thing that I want to get into, and I'll get into that in just a moment, is how this is being reported on in the Middle East. In fact, we'll be showing you a clip just, on the other side of this break. The bottom line being that this was never presented to Donald Trump. The killing of Soleimani was presented to Trump as an option by the military, by the Pentagon. And the reason that they slapped it in at the last minute was because they wanted something that was so extreme that the, quote, mid-range options, like, a pinprick airstrike or something like that, would seem reasonable. One of the options was to just do nothing. I mean, after all, the contractor, the American contractor who was killed, was in an Iraqi base defended by the Iraqi military. And, that got attacked by, well, nobody's actually even totally certain who attacked them. It looks like it was an Iranian-backed group. But, we could have said, well, that's for Iraq to deal with. I mean, we've had, something like 1,700 contractors killed in Iraq since the war started. Actually, the number's not quite, nobody's really certain because contractors don't have to report deaths. So, anyhow, we'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Off the Okay, the plot thickens. This is, I think I mentioned earlier that the, killing Soleimani option was one that the Pentagon just slapped in at the last minute to make their pinprick strikes option seem more like a reasonable thing rather than the most extreme option. Because they always present options from basically do nothing to here's the most extreme option that only a crazy man would do, in the hopes that the guy will take the middle. Well, Trump said, I'll do all of them, including killing Soleimani. So where does this go? Well, here's where it gets real interesting. Nick Kristof just tweeted, the Iraqi prime minister seems to be suggesting that the U.S. essentially lured Soleimani into a peace mediation and then used that shuttle diplomacy to assassinate him on Iraqi soil. In doing so, Nick Kristof, the New York Times reporter, is retweeting a tweet from Jane Araf, which says, this is stunning. The Iraq prime minister tells Parliament U.S. troops should leave. It says Donald Trump called him to ask him, now this is the prime minister of Iraq, says Donald Trump called him to ask him to mediate with Iran and then ordered a drone strike on Soleimani. Says Soleimani carrying response to Saudi initiative to diffuse tension when he was hit. And then this is I retweeted this too. Some of these headlines are just amazing, but this was I can't play the sound for this because it's a clip from a news source in Pakistan actually, But what they're saying is, and I quote, this is the clip on the piece. Senior journalist Haroon al-Rashid says Qasem Soleimani was carrying a letter about Saudi Arabia, including how to reduce tensions with Saudi Arabia. The letter expressed the wish that Iran and the tensions between Saudi Arabia should be alleviated. And then we go to that. Then there's Nick Kristoff's tweet. And then, keep in mind, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, Iran, China, and Russia had negotiations, military exercises in the Gulf. Right? They actually had military exercises, and now here's this tweet from Rudolph, from another. This is an English language news service out of Iraq, and breaking news: Iraq's prime minister. And the picture is of the prime minister of Iraq sitting with China's ambassador to Iraq. Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul al-Mahdi receives China's ambassador to Iraq, Zhang Tao, who's conveying Beijing's readiness to provide military assistance. Now, Iraq's parliament just voted to expel all Americans from Iraq, including American military forces. It was a non-binding resolution, but it was widely supported in their parliament. I mean, these are some of the headlines from these Middle Eastern sources. Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi said he has an appointment with Qasem Soleimani the next day. He was carrying a letter for me, an envoy of the Iranian government. That's going to hurt the U.S. at the UN to kill an envoy. Soleimani was an envoy, apparently, for Iran in a negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, trying to ratchet down tensions. You'll recall, Iran was blamed for blowing up the Saudi oil facilities. And the prime minister also said the U.S., it goes on from there. There's another one. Even the 10th of Muharram, Ashura processions can't be compared to the funeral of Qasem Soleimani in Tehran. In other words, this, as Iranians flood the streets in Iran's capital in what might be one of the biggest processions in the country's history. Nancy Pelosi, meanwhile, is trying to get a resolution through the House saying, Trump, you can't start a war.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or at least you can't start a war without the consent of Congress. It might be too late. Trump has kicked off his reelection and anti-impeachment campaign with a war with Iran. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up, and other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Also, just, adding to the news pile today. And we've got more for the next hour. Senator Elizabeth Warren first of all, she came out and said, wait a minute, what's going on with the timing on this thing? Increasingly, by the way, there's Greg Sargent, I believe it is, over in the Washington Post. In fact, there's a bunch of these here. The Steve Bannon, the producer of the Rachel Maddow show, he's saying the reporter brings the problem into sharp focus. Team Trump's official story about one of the president's most dangerous decisions doesn't appear to be true. If the airstrike wasn't needed to prevent an imminent attack, why exactly did the president greenlight such a radical offensive? Trump thought the dangerous new posture would help his weak image. Dean Baker tweeting that Lockheed Martin's stock went up 2% last Thursday, the day before the strike, which means that insiders were already buying defense stocks knowing that the strike was coming on Friday. Insiders like what? Eric Trump? Wilbur Ross? Well, I don't know. I would like to find out. And, Adam Schiff is talking about this. And breaking news, Eric Chewning. You've probably never heard his name. He's the chief of staff at the Pentagon. He resigned today. Why? Are the rats leaving a sinking ship? Or was this planned? I don't know. But anyhow, back to Elizabeth Warren. She said when the administration doesn't seem to have a coherent answer for taking a step like this, and they provided us with 3 different excuses up to this point, and they have taken a step that moves us closer to war, a step that puts everyone at risk, a step that puts the military at risk and puts the diplomats in the region at risk. I think people are reasonably asking about the timing and why it is that the administration seems to have all kinds of different answers. And then following up on that, Julian Castro, who dropped out, as you'll recall, last week, dropped out of the Democratic presidential primary race, just endorsed Senator Elizabeth Warren. He said, she's the one candidate I see who's unafraid to fight like hell and make sure America's promise will be there for everyone. Elizabeth and I share a vision of America where everyone counts, an America where people, not the wealthy or well-connected, are put first. I'm proud to join her in the fight for big structural change. This is getting fascinating. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, fascinating is a word for it, Tom. But as far as the Pentagon goes, I want to make a quick comment about that. I was surprised. I would say shocked when the Pentagon released the statement that Soleimani was killed by the order of the President of the United States.
That was their first words. That would be, pursuant to an order from the president, or some words to that effect. They literally started the sentence with that, with Donald Trump.
We never do that. There's this long-standing tradition in the military. If your boss gives you an order and you don't agree with it, but it's lawful, you don't blame your boss. You just execute the order. You never blame the boss. Right? That's like a military code, and we never did that. I mean, it's highly unusual. So that right there indicates there's some trepidation at the highest levels of the Pentagon, right? And that's going to cause some exodus, a brain drain, for lack of a better word. And I want to also criticize these comments by General Spider Marks. All right, Marks, who's
I'm not familiar with those comments.
Well, General Marks was responding to Democratic Congressman Chris Murphy from Connecticut. He questioned the timing of this attack on Iran. And General Marks said, he made a really pithy little, he said, Congressman Murphy needs to just, be quiet and listen. All right. And then he went on to say that, and everybody chuckled in the newsroom, and he went on to say that the killing of Soleimani was a result of a detailed target package with pattern of life. He went on to just really divulge classified information. Now, the reason why I'm critical of this is because you've got to analyze this critically. If you're sitting in Moscow, you're sitting in Beijing, and you are looking at international law calling this an assassination, what did General Marks just describe? Premeditation. Right? He just described premeditated assassination of a leader. They're sitting there. Beijing and Moscow are making an account of all of this, and Americans should be worried. But here's the thing. We have an off ramp here. We have an off ramp. I don't know. The universe must love us. There is an off ramp, and it comes via the Parliament of Iraq. All right, they want to expel U.S. soldiers, troops from their borders, right? Well, everybody's up in a tizzy about that. But check this out, Tom. We're sending 3,500 additional soldiers. Trump is sending 3,500 additional soldiers to Iraq.
No, Dave. They're not going to Iraq. They're going to Kuwait.
Well, Kuwait. All right. And
it's a staging place for Iraq, but they have not been introduced into Iraq yet, and there's been no announcement that they're going to be.
But all that is a token. That is a token force. All right. Everything in Iraq right now, if you put more people in Iraq, or Kuwait for that matter, because Iran can definitely reach Kuwait, all you're doing is increasing the target pool. All right. All right. So you want to intimidate Tehran, right? Trump, here's what you need to do. You need to get the force level of Iraq equivalent to what it was during the surge when I was there. You need to have about 150,000 U.S. soldiers. Then you will get Tehran's attention. But below that, they're not sweating it. All you're doing is increasing the target pool. And then if Iraq does expel, through congressional mandate, does expel U.S. soldiers, all right, we can use that to say, look, we support democracy. We support democratic solutions. All right. Mm-hmm. And because you've got to remember, Tom, look, all these places, the borders are porous. We in America are under such tight control. We don't realize how impoverished. We're under tight control because of the wealth of our nation. These countries like Iran and Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, I could go down the list. They are so incredibly, even Pakistan, who's a nuclear-armed country, those borders are so completely porous. Right. And they are defined by abject poverty, Tom. These people just move, not unlike herds of cattle. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't mean to be crude, but they're so impoverished.
Well, some of the people are actually nomads. I mean, they are pastoralists. They have animals and they move them as the seasons change, so that and the vegetation changes.
Walls aren't going to stop them. Okay. Mixed in with those nomads are terrorists. All right, if you will, if you want to use that word. Yeah. Trump's going to use that word like the Uzbek Islamic movement or Lashkar-e-Taiba who attacked Mumbai so brazenly. Look, he can connect all of those to Iran. Why? Because they travel through there. For crying out loud, we've been in Iran for years, and I'm not talking Iraq. Dave's not getting confused here, okay? We have been in Iran for years. They don't even care or know. Here's the deal. To answer your question, Trump, if he retains some smart people like George Bush did, Trump's going to get by with this and possibly accidentally put us in World War III.
Yeah.
All right.
That's my fear.
And and God bless, Chris Murphy, God bless, Bernie Sanders and everybody else raising this. But Elizabeth Warren. But here's the problem. If there is some sort of attack and Trump's people can link it, no matter how speciously to Iran, well, all those people criticizing him are going to look, they're going to look like they supported weakness instead of strength. You know how it goes, Tom.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War in the first place. They didn't want to be attacked as being wimps, and if it comes down to if that's what this leads to, then it's going to be very, very difficult because voting against war is, could be a real challenge for these people. So anyway, Dave, thanks a lot for the call. Sohail in Canoga Park, California. You are Iranian and you wanted to speak about Soleimani being a bad guy. Do I have that right?
Hi, Tom. How are you? I don't know. Should I ask you or you ask me questions? Because,
I'm guessing you know more about it than I do.
Forever. I'm following your program forever. I love you. I love your program. I support your program, Amy, and all these, programmers. So, but something is bothering me in Iranian because we feel you're not honest about something about Iran. You want to ask me a question, or can I?
Make your case.
Yeah, sure. My dad was in jail for 3 years because he's a journalist. We are, in
Iran,
like publish a book. Yeah, in Iran. Mm-hmm. So my cousins have been killed in the prison by these guys, these Soleimani. Soleimani, from your point of view, is a Major General Qasem Soleimani. From our point of view, he's a monster. Mm-hmm. Not he, because his group is a monstrous group. But, let me ask you this question. Less than 2 months ago, there was a big, huge, like, in Iran, there was people was in Iran in the street. They were striking against the regime of Iran.
You're right.
So they killed people in the street, and most of them was under 30 of age.
Yeah.
So they was pretty young.
Yes.
So they killed 1,500 people in the street, and also they took over 7,000 people in the jail, and they're torturing right now. They're torturing. Do you know who are they?
I don't.
Who are these people? They're torturing these people. This group, this Qasem Soleimani's group.
Sure. Yeah, it's the Quds Force. Yeah. I completely agree with you, Sohail.
My point is still, Tom. Still, I have a question. I didn't finish it.
Okay.
So I was following your program 2 months ago during that problems in Iran, during that strikes in Iran. Mm-hmm. You didn't even mention once about that people. But regarding to this Qasem Soleimani, you're talking about this monster every minute. That's bothering me because not you, not even Emmy, none of you were talking about people in Iran were killing.
Yes. Okay, thank you for putting that on the record, Sohail. I appreciate that. Now, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
During the time that people were out in the streets in Tehran protesting the Khamenei regime, and the Khamenei regime and Soleimani and his buddies and all the bad guys there killed all these people and imprisoned all these people, that was actually reducing the credibility of that regime and increasing, particularly among young people, the probability that there might even be, if not a political, a grassroots revolution may be too strong a word, but certainly blowback. I mean, there was discussion that this might be the end of the Khamenei regime, and the question was, is Rouhani enough of a moderate to make it through and end up being the guy who can bring Iran into a modern era, or is he going to have to go along with Khamenei? Right. So that was the conversation that was going on a month ago in Iran and about Iran. Right now, the conversation that's going on in Iran is those American SOBs killed one of our top government officials, and we will not tolerate it, and we all had to pull together. What's happening in Iran right now, from what I'm seeing, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, is very much like what happened in the United States after 9/11. George Bush was a very unpopular president. He was considered, illegitimate, and yet everybody pulled together behind him. Is that not happening in Iran now? And therefore, wasn't this a huge mistake on the part of Trump?
You care about the government of Iran, what they say. You don't care about the people of Iran, what do they say. So my point is, people, these monsters don't get killed by itself.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying is that Trump just gave the monsters more power.
100 years old, and they die naturally. So that's a fortune. That's a fortune that a big monster get killed. I don't care how, but these kind of monsters should have been killed everywhere. Not only.
Yeah, we're hitting a break here, Sohail. I'm sorry.
Sure.
18 minutes past or 48 minutes past. There's a hard break that I can't stop. But I appreciate the conversation. My only concern is that Trump just united Iran behind Khamenei. And that's not a good thing for us or for the world. I don't know. Sohail, call again later in the week, and let's continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Bye.
Thank
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hey, Happy New Year, Tom.
Thanks, back at you.
Man, I'm going to just a quick comment. I don't think that this will work for Trump. There's so much bad history behind the faults starting in the war with Iraq that, through the and the debt that came with all these wars through the Republican Party and Bush, that I don't see how it can be a good thing for Trump. but there's something else that's really got me worried, and that's the word assassination and how that's how
we've embraced that, basically. Yeah.
Well,
and there's a law against this. I think it was 1974. We passed a law saying that the United States government doesn't assassinate people.
Yes, that was God. What's his name? Down in South America after they killed him under Kissinger.
Uh-huh.
But at any rate, the other thing was that Trump has been using character assassination on Americans for forever, since he's been in office. Mm-hmm. And now for him to go and take it to a physical level in a foreign country that could actually start a war, I think that's saying more about him and the Republicans behind him, and it is really scary because we have a lot of progressives and good people on both sides of this argument who are care about America and democracy and I think we need to look into this behavior and behind this mentality that's harming America so bad.
Yeah.
Could I suggest an article that I read earlier today? It was
Sure.
An NPR article. The name of it was filed on. It was filed on January the 1st. The name is "Why the U.S. Embassy in Iraq Became a Target of Anger Again," and it was filed by Greg Meyer and Larry Kaplow.
Can you just summarize it for us within a minute here, Randy?
Sure. As you go through it, it gives a backstory to what was going on in Iraq the past 6 months to a year. Mm-hmm. What led to the embassy riot was one deal. Then are these events connected to the protests in Iraq? And then it talks about the militias that were the Iranian militias, the Hezbollah militias and stuff, what they were doing in the background, mm-hmm. and what is the U.S. doing in Iraq. And they answered a lot of questions and filled in a lot of blanks up until the point of the assassination or the military hit. So it's out there if we take the time to look and aren't afraid to ask the questions of ourselves.
Yeah, and with regard to that, and to those folks in Iraq who were basically pissed off that the United States is there, it's sort of a variation of my question to Sahil. Is by taking this action, have we strengthened their hand? Have we strengthened the hand of the mullahs in Iran? Have we strengthened the hand of the militias in Iraq? And Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia clergyman who's got a couple 100,000 followers in Baghdad.
We're going to find out.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. Yep. Randy, thanks for the call. It's concerning. It's 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So the question basically that I was asking our Iranian caller in the last call was a variation on, did we, by Trump striking, killing a senior government official, I mean, this would be like the Joint Chiefs of State, the head of the Joint Chiefs or the Secretary of Defense being assassinated with a strike out of the air by some other country, by Iran, for example. What would that do if the Secretary of Defense, Mike Esper, was assassinated? Whether somebody walked up to him on the street in Washington, D.C. and shook his hand and poisoned him, or whether a drone came flying out of the sky and blew him up. If the Secretary of Defense or the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, she's the number 3 official in our government. They refer to the Soleimani as the number 3 guy in the Iranian government, was killed. What would it do here in the United States? I think it would pull everybody together behind the government. I mean, God forbid it should happen. And I'm suspecting that that's what happened in Iran, that Trump just strengthened the hand of the regime. Mehdi in San Francisco, it says that you're also from Iran. Your thoughts?
Yes. Good morning. I am calling regarding that previous caller that his opinion is not really representing the Iranian. And we are talking about international law. We are not talking about who is bad or who is good in Iran. But this action is a gangster kind of imperialist aggression or gangster aggression. And we're not talking about whose father was in jail or family feud.
Right. Do you think that this strengthened the hand of Khamenei, of the Ayatollah who runs the country?
Sir, I am not going to basically continue this, unfortunately, because my opinion is on the left part.
Right.
I've been living here for a long time. I'm not really that kind of supporting of any aggression against anybody.
Yeah, I'm with you. My assertion is that I think that Trump just handed the Iranian regime the gift that they wanted.
Well,
it pulled together the people.
Unit. Yeah, people are unit right now, regardless of different opinions.
Yeah, and that's my concern.
So he has to educate himself if he can more read different material like Intercept or revolutionary paper or whatever.
Now, if Soleimani was actually carrying a letter from the Ayatollah to the Saudis, and the Prime Minister of Iraq was trying to broker a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia to lower tensions as a result of this blowing up the oil field a couple of weeks ago, then does that change the complexion and the meaning of all this?
I cannot answer that, sir. I don't. I'm not living there. I cannot say something that I don't know about it.
Sure.
But I'm telling you that anytime U.S. put pressure on Iranian government, the Islamic Republic get more power and basically have more attack on any uprising.
Yeah, they end up with more authority. Mehdi, thank you very much for the call. It's a thoughtful. Both of our Iranian callers here, very thoughtful. This has got to be really tough for people who are from Iran. One of my closest friends is Iranian. He lives in Washington, D.C. I should probably give him a call this afternoon and get his. In fact, he had a meeting with Rouhani about 2 years ago. Anyhow, we'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examined the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. Gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout, with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't. and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Back in the 80s, Louise and I and our three kids lived in Germany for a year, from June of 86 to July of 87, as I recall. And we lived in this region of Germany. It was called the Frankenwald, the forest area north of Nuremberg, about an hour north of Nuremberg and about 15 minutes south of the East German border, about 30 minutes west of the Czech border, and a little town called Steinach. And the next town over was Kulmbach, and in Kulmbach there was this giant castle. And in Steinach, in our backyard, I mean, you know, it was a walk through the forest of maybe 10 minutes, but in our backyard there was an old castle. It was called Nordeck, which was built in 1034 and had been abandoned for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was just a ruin. And it was just in the woods. I mean, there was a little plaque on it, and that was it. People didn't know about it. There was no road to it. You know, there it was in the woods. It overlooked the Steinach River, which was a very, very small river that ran through Steinach. And, you know, it was probably a way station where they were collecting tolls. And just down the road, there was another ruined castle deep in the woods. Now, I bring this up because one of the things that a friend of mine who had been in the German army, actually, and you know, during the war, he'd been drafted and was working with the Salem organization, this international relief organization where Louise and I were living at their headquarters. SalemInternational.org if you want to learn more about it. And then this friend of mine, his name was Horst von Heyer. He died a couple of years ago. He was, you know, when he died, he was a really old guy. But when he was drafted into the army, he was like 16, and it was in the last year of the war. I mean, he was, you know. So anyway, he told me, and I believe this to be true, but I don't know if it's true. But, you know, one of the stories that von Heyer told me was that the castles, the way that these castles got built was the local lords, and they weren't even the kings. Some of them declared themselves kings, but basically they were the local lords because the larger region had a king, would declare war against each other with a wink and a nod, with the agreement that they would never kill actually the kings or any of the king's family or any of the lord rather, or any of the minor lords, right? The rich people never would get killed in these wars, but they would pit the peasants against each other. And then they would say to the peasants, by the way, you know, you're at a war with those guys down the road and they're going to sneak over in the middle of the night and burn your thatched hut. Help us build this giant castle, and every time they come after us, we can, you know, we'll open the gate and you can all run inside the castle and be safe. And we can also store food inside this castle for a siege or for a war or for, even a drought. And out of this kind of medieval perspective, and von Heyer said, and he had traveled the world. I mean, he had worked all across Africa, the Middle East. He'd worked in Asia. He'd worked in South America. One of his assistants was eaten by an alligator in South Africa. And he said, you'll see basically this replicated all over the world. And it's kind of a rule of war that you don't take out the king. Because if you kill that king, then some other king might kill you if you're the king, if you're the decision maker. So kings never kill kings. And the example that Horst von Heyer told me was that he had read, and I recall this, although it's been more than 30 years or 20 years anyway, since I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, William Schur's masterpiece, that, the Americans knew what Berchtesgaden was, Hitler's eagle's nest. Hitler had built this house at the top of this mountain. It had a giant elevator that goes up to it. You can still visit it. And it was kind of his summer retreat, and it was where he went to plot the war and stuff. And he was there, 6 months out of every year, or several months out of every year. And it was right up on top of this mountain, and a good bomb could have taken it out. And FDR knew this. And Stalin knew this. But neither one of them would ever authorize bombing Berchtesgaden. Because you don't kill the king. You let the grunts, the warriors, kill each other. But you have to have the kings around to negotiate the terms of peace or the surrender or whatever, however the war ends. And you don't kill the princes. And that's why during World War II and during the Vietnam War and during the Iraq War and during the Afghan War, during the first and second Iraq wars, I'm sure that there was heightened security for people who were, say, Pentagon officials or members of the cabinet. But, they weren't expecting that, like during Vietnam, we were in a proxy war with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was openly supporting the Viet Cong. We were openly supporting the Diem and subsequent administrations in South Vietnam. And they never tried to take out, a cabinet member, the Soviets. They never attacked the United States. Or if one of our cabinet members, or if the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader of the Senate was traveling overseas, they didn't try and kill them. Because they knew that would alter the rules of war in such a way that, the rich and powerful would suddenly be in the crosshairs. And the rich and powerful won't put up with that. Now, I think this entire system is bizarre and corrupt and should be, at the very least, questioned and discussed. And it's something that we literally never discuss. And we started having this conversation on Friday, and I noticed that it was completely shut down over the weekend. But there were some people on Friday who, and in fact, I had a caller into this program on Friday who said, I think that what Donald Trump did was right. It was a good thing to take out a bad guy. And what's your response? And I started doing this rambling thing about, it was terrible. And what I was trying to build up to was basically, you don't kill the princes. You kill the soldiers. And I'm wondering, and again, I am not a graduate of the War College. I've been through the police academy in Georgia, but I've never been to a war college. So if any of you have been, officers or flag officers in particular, and you understand the rules of war, please educate me. What are the cutoff points? Who are the targets that you wouldn't take? If Stalin and Roosevelt chose not to take out Hitler, and Hitler chose not to take out Stalin and Roosevelt, and he could have bombed the White House or the Kremlin, Tojo didn't even, Tojo just took out Hawaii, took out Pearl Harbor. What's the limit? What's the cutoff point of who you don't assassinate? And did Donald Trump just change the rules of war for the entire world? Or did Donald Trump just change the rules of war as they relate to any country that finds itself in a position of conflict with the United States? Now, it may be that, Russia and China are going to, if they got into a conflict, actually they seem to be becoming allies. Let's say France and China got into a conflict. It may be that the Chinese, President Xi would never say, hey, let's take out President Macron, and Macron would never say, oh, we're going to take out President Xi. But if either one of them got into an open conflict with the United States, would they go after senior officials in the administration instead of the military? Now, I think Iran has kind of backed away from this a bit in the public statements that they've made in the last 24 hours, where they have said, expect a military response against military targets. Now, which might blow up my argument, because if you could say, okay, Soleimani was actually the head of the military, and therefore he was a military target, so this doesn't really apply. But my understanding is that he was also the number 3 guy in the government. So that would place him at like the Secretary of Defense or the head of the Joint Chiefs, who traditionally have not been targeted. So I'm not making an assertion here. I think the whole situation, having rules for war. War is organized mass murder. We just need to be very clear about it. David Swanson wrote an absolutely brilliant book a couple of years back that if you haven't read it, it's really worth going out and buying right now. It's called War is a Lie. And he deconstructs all this kind of stuff that I'm talking about. But might there be consequences way beyond the consequences that we're seeing right now from this assassination of the number 3 guy in a government that we're in conflict with? Or was it entirely appropriate because the guy was running a military or a militia? I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but I think that it deserves a conversation between Americans here in the United States.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. Julian Castro just endorsed Elizabeth Warren, by the way. And welcome back. David in Morgantown, North Carolina. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Where is President Obama?
He's writing a book right now, I believe. I'm not sure where.
Well, that could be true, but he's being attacked and he's not responding. Same with Hillary Clinton. I mean, this guy, Trump, is blaming them for everything.
Of course he is.
And I'm hearing no response.
Well, they're not responding because they don't want to elevate the visibility of Trump's blaming them. If Trump blames them and they don't respond, then everybody goes, oh, yeah, that's what Trump does. He's always complaining. He can't take responsibility for anything. He's always blaming somebody else. But if one of them responds and says, oh, no, I wasn't a wimp, then game on. Trump wins.
I don't believe that. I think people believe Obama much more than Trump.
I think that's probable, David. But again, you pick and choose who you're going to fight with. I mean, I get people on Twitter all the time who say just absolutely outrageous things about me. If I defend myself, I'm giving them fuel. So I just block them, it's like, or mute them. I mean, it's just that, and I think that's what Obama and Clinton President Obama and Secretary Clinton have done with Trump is basically they've muted him. I get your point. I disagree with it, but I get your point. David, thanks for the call. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Iran. And also last week I brought up Rachel Maddow a lot. I actually kind of wanted to apologize. I didn't mean to single her out with the media and do I trust it. And this goes into the media now, perpetuating this war. Did you know Anderson Cooper interned with the CIA before he started going to battlefields for journalism?
No, doesn't surprise me, but no, I didn't know that.
So what?
But that doesn't mean that he's bad. I mean,
What do you mean? What do you mean? Okay, Tom, but there's a conflict in interest if you're looking at the war machine that America is perpetuating and what we're hearing on the airwaves. Operation Mockingbird was the operation that the CIA did in 1950 and basically hired. Our tax dollars were paying CIA paid people to then go get a double job at a network. And just like Anderson Cooper. Anyway, whether or not he's a bad guy.
But that doesn't mean that that's what Anderson Cooper did. But if you look at what happened.
Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But I'll get to my point here.
Sure.
Jeffrey Sterling. Do you know who that guy is?
Yeah.
Jeffrey Alexander Sterling, a whistleblower who is still arrested. Did you know what he got
Obama went
arrested
after
for?
him.
Right, because of Operation Merlin. Do you know what Operation Merlin was?
I don't recall.
Operation Merlin was what Jeffrey Alexander Sterling let go and let loose to the media and the public, primarily because he was tasked. He came across information where he was giving Iran nuclear secrets that some people say whenever he got caught and this got blown to light. They were trying to say that these nuclear secrets were flawed and that they were going to be a fatal disaster in Iran whenever they tried to use these nuclear secrets. I don't know if you're aware, but there was actually like a Google satellite image of an Iranian nuclear facility that blew up that wasn't reported by Iran. And so some speculating that was part of that thing. Oh, I didn't get to finish. Dang it. I had so much information.
You got 10 seconds. Robbie,
oh,
quick.
Man. All right. Well, anyway, what you said was like the elites controlling war and making it war. The Havara Agreement is another part. All I see is Trump's getting a lot of the blame for this Iran thing, but the Democrats in the Senate set this up.
Yeah. Okay. Robbie, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Richard in Stockton, Montana. Hey, Richard, it says here you're a retired Army colonel and you know something about the rules of war?
Yeah, well, we want to go back to some of the origins of our military history, go back to the Revolutionary War. And you remember a movie called The Patriot? The British general said, well, we don't want you targeting our officers. It's uncivilized. And It kind of goes back to the age of the warrior kings, Frederick the Great, that, just like you said, it's the peasants and the soldiery that engages and kills themselves while the princes get ready for the next war. And then in our military culture, I've been the Command General Staff College. We never advocate assassinations, but we do advocate attacking our enemy's headquarters capabilities. So.
Capability, though, not the headquarters itself.
Well, hit the headquarters, a deep missile attack against their command and control structure.
Right. I get that.
Implies.
And you think there may be casualties from that, but if a country were to target somebody at the equivalent of a cabinet level in the United States or senior leadership of Congress, would that be a violation of the rules of war?
I really don't think so.
Huh. So Trump didn't create some new rule of war for the world?
I don't think so. He's acting out of impulsive recklessness.
I get that. I don't recall any time that any country has assassinated the number 3 leader of a foreign country. Although maybe
we could have gone after Giep a long time ago in Vietnam. So
yeah.
If you think about all the clandestine operations, Delta forces, and everything else, and why we don't touch others, it goes back to what's this greater construct,
Right. Although we did try to assassinate Castro about 50 times. So,
yes.
so that maybe blows up my theory. I don't know. Richard, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your insights.
All right, and I urge all Americans to demand accountability. So,
amen. Yeah, and you can call your member.
Send the Trump boys to war first. I'll go with them then. So
there you go. And you can call your member of Congress and share that with them at 202-225-3121. Richard,
and there's plenty of podiatrists waiting out there for bone spur assessments. So.
There you go. Thank you, Richard. Farfad in Los Angeles. It says here you're Iranian and you have some thoughts to share on this.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
You just had somebody call himself Iranian talking about killing a monster. I just want to say that these people, actually, they are right-winger Americans who happen to be speaking Farsi and born in Iran. And they're mostly either pro-Shah people or pro-Mujahideen, MEK.
Right.
And they just go into the radios and try to do this. But you're asking the right question, that every time that the U.S. does this, does it make it better for the Iranian regime, Iranian government to get more powerful? And that's the truth. The U.S. government doesn't want to have a real revolution, a real change of the government in Iran, a democratic and freedom loving government in Iran. Just another puppet regime of the U.S., just like Shah. That's what they're looking for. And every time people try to do something in Iran, U.S. try to involve itself and not letting that happen. And the example is that just you can see that the last few days, millions of people of Iranian came to the streets for Soleimani, General Soleimani, and that shows that first of all the people show that they are against what the U.S. did, and they don't want the U.S. to be involved with the Iranian affairs, and they don't want to have war with the U.S. in order to get rid of their own government. Mm-hmm. And these people, like the caller, they love to have U.S. bomb Iran to destroy Iran and Iranian government so they can go back to the government as they. So
this would be like the Cuban Americans who came from Cuba who had been very, very rich under Batista, and now they're all okay, got it.
Exactly, they're the Cuban people in Florida that are
in Miami,
a bunch of them in Los Angeles. Yeah, a bunch of them are in Los Angeles, and there is no countries in the world in the history that there are so many radio and TV stations and the newspaper that straight going to Iran and bombarding the people of Iran with the propaganda by the U.S. and Saudis, and all this money is going to Iran. And these people are just working for the CIA against the Iranian government. They're not working against the Iranian regime. They're working against the Iranian people and against Iran.
I got it. Farfad, we're out of time. I'm sorry. But thank you very much for the call. My theory that this strengthens the regime is apparently right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In other words, Trump did the dumbest, stupidest, most counterproductive thing from American interest point of view possible. We'll be back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign lead writer, leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hearst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hearst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, El Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hearst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hearst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hearst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know, during World War II, one of the real huge mistakes that Franklin Roosevelt made was interning over 100,000 Japanese Americans, taking away their property, stealing their businesses, putting them in camps. We haven't gone that far yet, but reports are coming in. Gabe Ortiz is writing over at Daily Kos. In the midst of ongoing threats against Iran from impeached President Donald Trump, more than 60 Iranian American and Iranian travelers, now these are American citizens with American passports in many cases, were reportedly detained at length and interrogated at the U.S.-Canadian border over the weekend. There was a pop concert in Vancouver, Canada, by an Iranian pop group, music group. And a lot of Americans of Iranian ancestry who wanted to hear this and see this traveled up to Vancouver to do so. The Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, said that many of those detained and outright blocked from re-entering the U.S. had been there for that Iranian pop concert. The group said, quote, those detained reported that their passports were confiscated and they were questioned about their political views and alliances and allegiances. The group said that one U.S. citizen identified as a medical student named Crystal was detained for more than 10 hours. The vast majority of people being held last night were American citizens, she said, according to CARE. We kept asking why we were being detained and asked questions that had nothing to do with, and we were being asked questions that had nothing to do with our reason for traveling. And I was told, I'm sorry, this is just the wrong time for you guys. Another traveler who had gone to Canada for the holiday break and was also interrogated, quoted, quote, noticed people of other backgrounds getting processed quickly while the people of Iranian descent were left waiting for hours. A source, CARE said in a statement, a source at the Customs and Border Patrol, CPB, reported that the Department of Homeland Security has issued a national order to CPB to report and detain anyone with Iranian heritage entering the country who is deemed potentially suspicious or adversarial, regardless of citizenship status. Now, the Customs and Border Patrol spokesperson at the border crossing between Vancouver and what would that be, Seattle, more or less, Washington State anyway, did not confirm or deny that report. Although a CPB spokesperson later denied it, but federal immigration officials don't exactly get the benefit of the doubt after years and years of lying to us. So, fascinating stuff. Anyhow, Jim in Oakland, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
I just wanted to say that that's the problem, because we have a pathological liar and someone that commits crimes in office and as a leader. When they tell you the truth, you don't even know if it's true or not. And all of these other things happen, like being denied passport rights, and because, I mean, you just don't know what to believe.
Well, what we do know is that Trump first said that this was to stop an imminent attack. And then when Congress said, okay, give us the proof, he said, well, it wasn't an imminent attack. The guy just, he's always plotting against Americans, and we had a chance to take him out. And so, I mean, he started out with a lie, and he has now admitted that it was a lie, or at least the Pentagon apparently has. So the question then is, if this was not something that had to be done to save American lives this minute, but was basically we were simply taking out an enemy of the United States, and there's certainly no shortage of them all over the world, then why this guy, and why in this moment, and why inside a third country in Iraq, where now Iraq's parliament has turned against us? In other words, this is a foreign policy disaster. It has turned Iraq against us. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We'll always have a why when there's a liar in charge.
Yeah, I think you got it.
That's the problem.
Okay. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. Dennis in Caldwell, Texas. It says here you disagree with me, Dennis. What part of the regime in Iraq is now stronger, and the people in Iran is now stronger, and the people of Iraq don't want us in Iraq anymore? Are you missing?
Well, if they don't want us in Iraq, that's
Dennis, you need to turn your radio down.
Hold on.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
But I agree with assassinating the general. But it's been a long time coming. They need to go after the Ayatollah Khomeini. And
but here's the thing, Dennis. If you want to take down the Iranian regime, and the Iranian people are suspicious about American intent and American intentions, then Dennis, I got to let you go. I'm sorry, your radio is just bleeding through here. It's distracting me. If you're going to take, if our goal was regime change in Iran, the worst way to do it is for us to kill our way into that goal, because all that does is pisses off all the Iranian people. I mean, if some other country wanted to change the regime in the United States, they wanted to replace, for example, Obama or his heir, Hillary Clinton, with Donald Trump, the smart way to do it is to support the American people who love Donald Trump. The stupid way to do it would be to kill Hillary Clinton and claim credit for it. That would be insanely stupid. So, according to, what's his name, who wrote Proof of Conspiracy? Seth Abramson. According to Seth Abramson and this 400-page book he wrote, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Russians all wanted to see Donald Trump as president. And so they all funded and financed, operations on Facebook in particular that were under the radar by and large, to pit Americans against each other, to trash Hillary Clinton, and to elevate Donald Trump. That's how you affect regime change. And it's entirely possible that regime change came about in the United States, that is, from a Democratic administration to a Republican administration, from a Democratic Republic form of government to a semi-autocratic form of government or oligarchic form of government. We now have our first oligarch as president. They accomplished that not by killing their way there, but by activating the people. So if we want to change the government of Iran, if that's our official goal, the way to do it is to secretly, and it would have to be secretly, it would have to be so down low that they didn't figure it out until after it happened, just like what happened to us in 2016. It wasn't until after the election of 2016 that the American public found out that foreign governments had been big supporters of Donald Trump. And in fact, in all probability, they're the only reason he's president right now. So that's how you would have to do it. You support the rebels in Iran who are opposed to the regime in a way that can't be tracked back to you, or at least not within the period of time it would take to reestablish a new government that was friendly to the United States. You just don't kill your way into these things. That always backfires. It doesn't work. Anyhow, Natasha in Phoenix City, Alabama. Hey, Natasha, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just want to say I listen to your show almost every day, and I just really appreciate your knowledge on so many different topics.
Thank you.
I myself am not very knowledgeable about geopolitics, so I just had a couple questions. The first one, I was wondering, is there legally some law or something that states that the president must notify citizens about, his reason for the attack? I mean, could there be a security or a safety reason that he could use to keep that from us? Or?
According to the War Powers Act, first of all, there's a 1974, as I recall, or it was in the 70s anyway, law that specifically prohibits assassinations. The U.S. government assassinating a foreign leader. Now, there is an exception to that, and I'll get to that in a second. According to the War Powers Act, if the president wants to take an aggressive action against another country or an official of another country, like he did in Iran on Friday, he has to first notify Congress and essentially get their permission. Now, again, there's an exception to that. And it's the exact same exception that it is to the you may not assassinate people. And that is that if the president perceives an immediate threat to the United States, which cannot be mitigated any other way other than by killing this guy, then he has the authority to do it. And then he has a few day period, I think it's a 5-day period within which he has to notify Congress after the fact that he did it and provide them with all the intelligence on which he based his decision so that they can say, yep, you did it right. And that's the argument that, and then the third part of it is that the authorization to use military force, under which virtually every strike has happened since 9/11, including the Obama administration taking out Gaddafi in Libya and all these other things. The authorization to use military force says that the president may go ahead and do these things without congressional approval if he's going after somebody who attacked us on 9/11 or who was involved in attacking us on 9/11. And Mike Pence tweeted out on Saturday that Iran was involved in 9/11, which is complete BS. So that's that. Did I answer your question, Natasha?
For that one. And then my second one, and I'll just leave you to answer that after, is as far as, Americans who do not want a war, is there even a way after this attack now to de-escalate our tensions and prevent it? Or
Yes. This is the legislation has been introduced into both the House and the Senate that for a new War Powers Act. A new, a modern, updated version of the War Powers Act, because the old one didn't envision a sociopath or a psychopath as a president. That would update that would strengthen congressional authority, and that would essentially rewrite the 2001 or 2002 authorization to use military force against Al Qaeda that has been, stretched to the point of unrecognizability by pretty much every president, Bush, Obama, and now Trump. And tighten this stuff up. And that legislation is really worth calling your member of Congress and saying that you support. And the phone number for the congressional switchboard is 202-225-3121 or 224-3121. Either one will get you there. Okay, Natasha?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure. Great talking with you. Thanks for great questions. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. This is just craziness, what's going on here. And welcome back. Patrick in Long Island, New York, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? How were your holidays?
Thank you. Back at you.
Good. Listen, I see some correlations. First thing I want to say is I believe I saw Elizabeth Warren on MSNBC on Sunday, and she brought up the coincidence of the timing of this, the old wag the dog type thing.
Yep.
And the interviewer, who I don't remember, just sat there in stunned silence looking at her like he didn't know what to say. And I heard you quote a few articles earlier today, and one thing I will give Fox News is their ability to repeat and pound the same message to death. And I feel that the coincidences need to be mentioned as often as possible. Did there not come like 3 or 4 decisions that kind of won against Trump on Thursday or Friday?
There was a bunch of bad news for Trump on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. One was the release of this whistleblower report that the Russian bank, VTB Bank, which is a state-owned bank, so basically it's a bank that President Putin has control of. That's the bank that backstopped $2 billion worth of loans that Deutsche Bank gave to Donald Trump after his bankruptcies in the 90s. And, that might be the mechanism by which, Russian oligarchs basically own Donald Trump, number one. And then there was, I think I've got I used to have this.
I think there was one about his tax and another one about the management and budget papers.
Yeah, Ted Lieu and Kathleen Rice opened an investigation into Donald Trump for manipulating the stock market, buying and selling stocks based on what he was going to tweet about. And then the OMB, and those unredacted emails from the OMB. Rachel Maddow did a big show on this Thursday night. There was an illegal conspiracy to hide the withholding of money from Ukraine.
Now, we had mentioned earlier that Trump is reckless and disregards human life. The sophistication, in a sense, of this plot has Putin's fingerprints all over it. I don't think he came up with this on his own.
Oh, no. The U.S. military had been tracking Soleimani, and for decades apparently, and they gave Trump a list of options in response to the Iranian-supported paramilitary in Iraq blowing up a U.S. contractor.
So you don't think he's being a Putin puppet at the moment?
Oh, I think that, by Donald Trump hurting the image of the United States in the Middle East and frankly around the world, by stupidly strengthening the regime in Iran, which is allied with Russia. I think that everything that he's doing here is working to the benefit of Russia and to the detriment of the United States. I'm just not sure that he's doing it because Putin's whispering in his ear. I think he's doing it because he's a there were two opportunities that he had to strike back at Iran. One was after they blew up an oil field in Saudi Arabia, and the other was, after they took down an American drone. And those happened within a couple of weeks of each other. And in both cases, Trump didn't respond. And on Fox News, some of the John Bolton type war hawks were saying this is making him look weak. And so I think that Fox News goaded him into it, frankly.
Okay, that's another one. Okay, thank you very much, Tom.
Sure. Good talking to you, Patrick. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. I hope that we learn, and I hope that we learn quickly, exactly what Donald Trump's rationale was for all this. Because so far, I've seen no evidence that there was an imminent threat. And in fact, it looked like Soleimani was engaged in a peace negotiation. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Thanks again for supporting the program. Welcome back. We're kind of trying to figure this whole thing out. It just sure seems to me like Donald Trump is really harming American interests by helping consolidate the power of the Iranian regime, this brutal regime that runs Iran, that is allied with Russia and China, and just last week was doing military exercises with them. There was an active democracy movement in Iran that was showing up in the streets. The Ayatollahs were so freaked out about it that they killed a bunch of these people and imprisoned thousands more. An active democracy movement growing in Iran. And those people now are going to be viewed as traitors. The regime's power has been strengthened and consolidated by this action that Donald Trump took. And he took it right after the news came out. Now, just keep in mind, this was right after on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of last week. It was revealed by a whistleblower that the $2 billion in loans that Deutsche Bank gave Donald Trump, that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy's son signed off on when he worked at Deutsche Bank, that $2 billion worth of loans that got Donald Trump out of being totally in the hole, not a single American bank would loan him a penny after a series of bankruptcies. That $2 billion in loans was backstopped by a Russian bank that Putin controls, VTB Bank. That came out. It came out, another story that came out that looked really bad for him that would have just nailed the impeachment. Right? He's saying, there was no conspiracy to withhold aid from Iran as part of a blackmail bribery scheme. Excuse me, not Iran, Ukraine. He says, that wasn't going on. Well, the emails that Bill Barr had redacted to make it look like there wasn't actually a scheme were leaked from somebody apparently inside the Office of Management and Budget. And those leaked emails, that unredacted emails, show A, that Bill Barr was actively involved in a cover-up, and B, that the order had come from Trump himself via the Office of Management and Budget not to release those funds. And then on top of that, Ted Lieu opens a congressional investigation into Trump and his crime family for buying and selling stocks just before he tweets things that'll move the stock market. And all of a sudden, the subject sure did change. Sam in Canton, North Carolina. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind?
I have a question inquiring minds want to know. You might say, now early last week, Trump and Putin spoke, I believe, twice on the telephone. Mm-hmm. And the White House won't tell us what they talked about. Then I think it's Thursday night, Trump assassinated Soleimani. My question is, did Putin tell Trump to assassinate Soleimani? We know after Helsinki that Trump stood on stage and said he does not trust the American intelligence agencies, but that he does trust Vladimir Putin. So I'm looking at putting one and one together and coming up with a huge question mark.
Yeah.
Because Trump does any dictator in the world that flatters Trump, he'll do anything they tell him to do.
Oh, yeah. The president of Turkey called him up and said, get out of Syria. And he got out of Syria. Screw the Kurds. Because Erdogan hates the Kurds.
I got to ask the question one more time, and then that'll be it for me. Did Putin tell Trump to assassinate Soleimani?
Right.
And did Trump do that?
And the answer to that will be found if we get the readout of those phone conversations that are right now in the most secure vault in the entire United States. And I think that Congress has the right to know the answer to those questions. Thanks a lot for the call, Sam. Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. On Saturday, they said that the Selective Service System had crashed because of worries of possibly reenacting the draft. A little ironic, with Trump in the draft, but
yes.
And
bone spurs are no longer an exception.
Yeah. And however, before that would take place, I believe you would have they would be calling back the recently discharged military individuals,
right?
Because they sign a contract.
Right. Once you're in the military, you're never actually legally out. They can always call you back.
Well, they got on the contract, I believe it's an 8-year contract, and Army, Navy, and that they signed, they'll go 3 years active maybe, or Marines, it's 4 years active, and then 4 and 5. What they call the IRR, the Individual Ready Reserve.
Right.
So they would get called first because, they've been trained and everything, and it costs quite a bit to train, a new raw recruit.
Right.
So.
Right.
And somebody also said too, if he did hit those 52 cultural sites, that would totally make the Iranian people, everybody, regardless if they like that guy or not, pull together.
The support, I think already the support for Khamenei and for Rouhani, and Rouhani, I think, has the potential to be a reformer. Khamenei is, he's a hardcore, right winger all through and through. The support for them has been totally cemented, totally solidified. Thank you, Dave.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, How can we democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late? From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today is Cyber War: How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hilltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/TheDonald and r/Hillary for Prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general elections season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention in the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber war is the...
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The world had, according to Trump, virtually devastated the country. Treason and Betrayal is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I have a science question. This is absolutely extraordinary. Number one, Australia is on fire right now. We have, climate disasters happening all over the planet. We've had our share of them here in North America as well. And one of the things that is feeding this is meat. The consumption of meat around the world is contributing about 10% of the greenhouse gases out there. So you've got, on the one hand, climate scientists, saying that we all need to eat less meat and revisit how we do agriculture. And then also you've got health folks like, the Lancet, the British Medical Journal, came out. This was a new report published in the British Medical Journal Lancet, recommends a largely plant-based diet. This is a group of scientists from around the world who studied nutrition and food policy, deliberated for 3 years, and said that around the world, meat consumption should drop by 50%. Now, that's for health. That's to reduce the number of heart attacks, to reduce the number of strokes, to reduce the amount of obesity and the concomitant type 2 diabetes and problems that follow along with that. Last October, another completely separate study was published in the journal Nature that essentially said the same thing. And then this is, in fact, here's the abstract: health risks associated with meat consumption, a review of epidemiological studies. This was in the Journal of Nutrition Research. Consumption of increasing amounts of red meat, and particularly processed meat, is associated with an increased risk of total mortality, cardiovascular disease, colorectal cancer, and type 2 diabetes in both men and women. And that's even when you consider things like age, race, BMI, history, smoking, blood pressure, lipids, and physical activity. None of those things have as much impact, apparently, or enough to swing the variables as simply eating meat in terms of your risk of dying young. So you got all that. And in my opinion, between climate change and do you want to die young, meat has become the new tobacco, which is, I guess, my question for you. Do you think that meat is the new tobacco? Because guess what? Remember how tobacco fought back? The tobacco, Mike Pence wrote an op-ed for one of the newspapers in Indiana back in 2000 saying, oh, tobacco doesn't cause addiction, nicotine doesn't cause addiction, tobacco doesn't cause cancer. Right. So now you've got, the kind of the equivalent of the tobacco industry. The meat industry has one of these too. And this is an amazing story. James Tapper writing for The Guardian. The headline, Red Meat Plays Vital Role in Diets, Claim Expert in Fighting Against Veganism. Advocates of red meat will begin a fight back against the growth of veganism this week at the UK's biggest farming conference, with claims that eating lamb and beef is vital because, drumroll, some plants and fish are being drained of their nutrition. Yes, factory farming has caused the nutrient level in our vegetables to drop by 50% over the last 50 years. In a speech at the Oxford Farming Conference, Alice Stanton will tell ministers, farmers, and environmentalists that key nutrients in some fruits, vegetables, and grains have dropped by up to 50% over 50 years. The solution? Wouldn't you think the solution would be, how about farming practices that keep the nutrients in the soil so the plants can absorb them? Or how about farming practices where you're growing nutrient-rich species rather than ones that simply don't, ripen rapidly on the way to the store or as they're shipped across the country? No. Their response is, oh, you're lacking nutrients, you need to eat meat. I don't get it. Meat is pretty nutrient poor. I mean, if you want the nutrients from eating animals, you basically need to eat the entire animal. All those organ meats and brains and guts and all that kind of stuff, like they did back in the old days. Just eating a burger, just eating muscle meat is not going to do it. So is meat the new tobacco? In addition, there's some other things here that I think are really worth noting. The exodus, Hunter is writing about this over at Daily Kos, the exodus of top defense officials under Team Trump continues. In the weeks before Christmas, 5 senior Pentagon officials resigned their posts for unclear reasons. And now Defense Secretary Mike Esper's chief of staff, former Army Intelligence Officer Eric Chuning, has delivered his own resignation. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but now Politico is reporting that Chuning will be leaving at the end of the month to spend some time with his family. I don't know, is it a new job in the private sector? Normally, you don't have senior defense officials bailing as the country is about to slide into war. Usually it goes the other way around. And this is the reporting over at Daily Kos. Behind the scenes, though, Esper's office appears to be in turmoil. A foreign policy report on Sunday revealed that Trump Defense Secretary Esper had cut senior Pentagon leaders out of the loop on the Soleimani assassination, and that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were not consulted and were not briefed on the operation ahead of time. That's nuts. I mean, you just don't do that. The usual approval and decision-making process did not occur, an anonymous defense official told Foreign Policy Report. It's amazing. Meanwhile, Ishan Tharoor is writing over for the Washington Post. The headline, Trump's order to kill Soleimani is already starting to backfire. Over the weekend, thousands of mourners in cities in Iraq and Iran participated in funeral processions. He was a Washington boogeyman, but then, goes on to say President Trump helped stoke the flames even further with a tweet threatening the destruction of Iranian cultural sites. And, the net effect of this is that the backlash is already consolidating the power of the mullahs in Iran. I mean, this is not a healthy thing. There's another piece, this over at the Financial Times. It's headlined, U.S. influence in Iraq wanes as Iran strengthens grip. And one Iraqi official told the Financial Times, quote, Donald Trump has accelerated Soleimani's work in Iraq, even if he's dead. They created a mess because they couldn't understand Iraq. And, it goes on, how's Mahdi's caretaker government? I mean, the president of Iraq is quite weak. And what's he going to do? I mean, the Iraqi parliament just voted Now, it's non-binding. It was a resolution, not a law, but voted to expel all Americans from Iraq. You recall, we pretty much got out of Iraq. And then in 2014, ISIS arose. And so we went back into Iraq to fight ISIS. Well, who also was in Iraq fighting ISIS? Soleimani and the Quds Force. In fact, Iran, this is from this piece in the Financial Times, American forces returned in 2014 to fight ISIS, which had seized swaths of Iraqi territory, but only after Iran first came to Baghdad's aid. And then, the fight against ISIS then saw the rise of myriad Iraqi Shia militias mobilized under the umbrella of the Popular Mobilization Units, a paramilitary force. Now, it was the head of the Popular Military Mobilization Units, the PMUs, that was also assassinated along with Soleimani. And he was an Iraqi Shia, who's high up in the Iraqi government. And this is what the Iraqis say. This is a quote from a former Iraqi official to the Financial Times. By 2010, the Americans had very little depth in their relationships inside the country. They spent millions on the Iraqi army only to find it disintegrate in 2014 in a matter of hours. They left a series of projects half finished. There's really nothing but a trail of broken promises. As long as the U.S. was pursuing the shared Iranian and Shia militia goal of trying to defeat ISIS, they were willing to deal with us. But immediately after that was done, there was a lot of pressure to reduce the American presence. It's been very clear, these are all quotes from various Iraqi sources to the Financial Times. It's been very clear the U.S. has lost allies within the Iraqi state. It's partly because of its own doing and the incoherent U.S. policy in Iraq. Another concern is that the shifting dynamics, this from the Financial Times article, another concern is that the shifting dynamics will damage the youthful anti-government protest movement that has for weeks been challenging the role of Iran and demanding reforms. Well, we had a caller earlier who would say, okay, the Iranian regime is in trouble. You got young people revolting in the streets. They had to arrest thousands of people. They killed thousands of people in those protests. So Iran has joint military exercises with Russia and China a couple of weeks ago. And Trump is talking in back channels with China and Russia. He had 2 conversations with Putin last week. He's been talking with Xi about trade stuff. And, the caller just asking the question, did these guys say to Trump, hey, do something to help strengthen the Iranian regime? And assassinating Soleimani certainly did that. I mean, that's absolutely the case. So where does all this lead? And is meat the new tobacco? If you don't want to talk about Trump or Iran or Iraq, sometimes it's nice to, have a palate cleanser, right? 17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Let's take a break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today, by the way, marks the 301st day since there has been a White House briefing. 301 days with no White House briefings. And welcome back. Lorraine in San Diego watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Lorraine, what's on your mind today?
Hi. It seems to me that the Congress has a solution in their power to deflect the inevitability of war by having the Senate proceed immediately with impeachment and removal from office of the president.
I agree.
And Americans need to, from the ground up, the groundswell of people need to write and contact their congressmen, their senators about moving forward with this, because in addition to the War Powers Act, they need to. We have this potential. We should not be reactive. We should be proactive, and people need to do this, and that's my statement.
Well, I completely agree with you, Lorraine. And if you live, and you don't, you live in California, but speaking to the camera here, if you live in a red state, if you have a Republican or two Republicans representing you in the United States Senate, please call them, 202-225-3121. Write that number down and put it on your refrigerator with a magnet, right? 202-225-3121. Call your Republican senators and tell them Trump has gone over the edge. He needs to be removed from office as quickly as possible to save the world from World War III.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lorraine. I'm totally with you. And I see that as the only way to do it. Richard in Naples, Florida. Hey, Richard, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Well, hey, Tom, I'm so excited to talk to you. I think you're in the middle of something phenomenal. What's happening, I think, is that the Senate will not impeach. Will not do the trial.
Yeah.
They'll never get to that because it's going to approach the elections, and it's going to be so mixed in with the elections that Trump and his cronies, which you've made me aware of now with your discussion of the conspiracy, and it is up to us, Tom, the U.S. People, to understand
Go
what's
ahead,
happening, and they will be able to express their very most important voice on this, because they will be voting on the impeachment of Trump.
Right.
It will never have been tried.
But here's the question, Richard. Do you think, and I'll just ask this generally as well as of you, do you think that Donald Trump's impetuous, impulsive action in Iraq to kill the Soleimani, without consulting the Joint Chiefs of Staff, without consulting the Pentagon, without briefing Congress, without doing anything, do you think that might be the thing that causes some of these Republican senators to say, holy cow, this guy really needs to go?
Well, I hope so. I really do hope so.
Yeah, I do too. And you live in Florida. You've got two Republican senators, Rick Scott and Marco Rubio. Please call them both. Okay? The number is 202-225-3121 for the offices of both of them. Just say, I'd like to speak to the office of Senator Scott or Senator Rubio, and deliver the message. Richard, they need to hear from you. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Bill in Anza, California. Hey, Bill, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. Hey, first of all, we need to do something about this Republican attack on the term Happy New Year. And
there you go.
Now, I live here in Southern California, and I'm a big air show nut.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed something peculiar at the Miramar Air Show in late November, October, November. The helicopters are all gone. Most of the squadrons are gone. And then I also noticed that they're loading up the troop transports with pallets, which are usually munitions, off the coast of Camp Pendleton. Now, that was going on 2 months ago.
Right.
So it seems like some of this may have been planned well in ahead. You know what I mean? But I'm just throwing that out there just for the listeners.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Just as the impeachment hearings were starting?
Yeah, and it just seems like usually there's a lot of helicopters, and the Marines put on a pretty good show, and but they were all gone.
Yeah.
So where'd they go? You know,
very interesting.
An interesting question. Anyway, appreciate you.
Yeah,
thanks
for the call.
Okay,
good to hear
bye.
from you. Robin in Belhaven, North Carolina. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm nervous. The president. Of course, I wake up that way every day.
Yeah, I wake up and the first thing I do is get my phone off the bedside stand and check the New York Times to see if the president has blown up the world yet. I mean, that's how bizarre it is.
It is, and I woke up New Year's Day and I went, "Oh shoot!"
Yeah.
Anyway, let's. My topic is talking about the embassy attack in Benghazi.
Okay.
We already know how obsessed he is with not only Obama and wiping out everything Obama did and stood for,
right,
but anything that was affiliated with Hillary Clinton.
Right.
He, in my opinion, was clearly enraged, unhinged, disconnected from whatever reality he ever is connected to. And
when
we want to find out
when the Iraqi civilians and took the U.S. embassy in
yeah, that's
Baghdad.
Of course what he's responding to. And if you I don't know why we always question what made him do this. All you got to do is either listen to right-wing radio or watch Fox cable news channel.
Right.
Well, I can't afford cable TV, so the only way for me to get Fox News is to log online, and and then I don't ever do that unless it's really important that I want to see where
they'll give you 10 minutes for free. Yeah.
Okay, so then let's see.
Say hi to your dog for us, Robert.
That he doesn't care about democracies,
right.
So that's not a consideration in his decision. He doesn't care about stability in the Mideast at all, or anywhere.
Right.
He doesn't He has no ideals about democracy.
Right.
He admires dictators and authoritarians.
Yes.
So, and he's already threatened to blow Iran off the face of the map.
Right.
So this really isn't a surprise that
right.
People still just can't really wrap their head around these decisions he makes.
Yeah, no, I get it. Robin, thank you for the call, and the best to your dog. DeCarlo in Lafayette, Indiana. Hey, DeCarlo.
Hey, how you do, Tom?
Good.
I was wanting. Good. I'm glad to hear. I was just wanting to answer your question when you were talking about why would he do this, and I said all you have to do is look back in our very recent history: Libya, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Iran. What do they all have in common? They all have giant oil reserves. So when we have a corporatocracy or a plutocracy with corporations running our government, they're the ones that are going to go in and they say, we're going to pick and choose what we want because they have something we need.
Right, but this action didn't destabilize the Iranian government. It destabilized the Iraqi government, and it strengthened the Iranian government.
Right, now, but remember, Iran is also in a situation, they just had that green movement like they were trying to do in Egypt,
right.
And they had to do a lot of things to the students, but still, if they can stir a little doubt in that country, they think that they can destabilize it like they did with Libya and like they did with Iraq, and then go in and be able to actually acquire the goods that they wanted.
Yeah, but see, we directly attacked Libya and Iraq. We haven't directly attacked Iran inside Iran. I think this is backfiring big time. I understand your logic, DeCarlo. I just think that it's going to backfire, and I think that, and this is probably one of the reasons why he didn't run it by the Joint Chiefs, because he knew that they would have told him it was a stupid idea. DeCarlo, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here in the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a grieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton. Oh, this is somewhere between interesting and bizarre. It's from the Daily Mail, which is a British newspaper, written by Tim Stickings. The headline, Iranian advisor drops chilling hint of attacks on Trump properties. The first couple paragraphs. An advisor to Iranian President Hassan Rouhani last night dropped a chilling hint of an attack on Donald Trump's property empire in revenge for the death of military commander Qasem Soleimani. Hassaneddin Ashina shared a link to a Forbes article listing all of Trump's properties in New York, his hotels and resorts across America, and golf courses in the U.S. and Britain. The list included the Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where the president was staying when he ordered the hit on Soleimani, as well as the Trump International hotels in Washington and Las Vegas, and his New York Tower with its Fifth Avenue entrance. Iran has already threatened the White House, and the Rouhani advisor declared yesterday that Tehran's, quote, sole problem is Trump, end quote, rather than the American people, dropping yet another hint of a direct reprisal against Donald Trump himself. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's like, open bottle, release genie, or release something. I mean, the winds of war. It's probably the best way to put it. Pat in Watertown, Connecticut. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Hey, you had mentioned a Putin call, maybe advising him to kill this or assassinate.
Well, we have no idea what happened in the call. It happened last week.
Yeah, I know. That's my point. And you said that would be locked up in this server and nobody has access to it.
Right.
It needs a code. And as well as the phone call to the Ukrainian president. At any point, does any administration after this administration have access to that secret server? Yeah, it's a secure server in the White House that is not connected to the internet in any way, and the only way you can get into it is with a particular password or passcode that is, unique to some senior administration officials in the White House. And it's where the transcript had gone of Trump's conversation with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. It's where the transcripts of his, to the best of our knowledge, the transcripts of his conversations, his phone conversations with Putin have gone, and other world leaders. And apparently a lot of other evidence of crimes that Donald Trump has committed is stashed away there. The conversations that he had when he was traveling, where, the 2-hour private meeting he had in Helsinki and the hour or so meeting he had on the sidelines of, one of the big international summits, those we'll probably never know. He took the notes away from the translators in one case, destroyed the notes in another case, essentially threatened the translator. So it's possible that if we get a Democratic president next time, they could open that vault and take that information out and reveal it to the world. It's also entirely possible that Trump and his minions will simply destroy it if they haven't done so already. They seem to have no problem destroying evidence. Keep in mind, there's that, was it Netflix or Amazon? Or CNN or whatever. There's a new movie out about destroying the evidence of the torture. And it's called The Torture Papers, as I recall, or The Torture Report. Yep. Louise and I watched most of it last week. The person who destroyed that 100 hours of tape of American CIA officers and contractors torturing people from Iraq and Afghanistan, that was destroyed by Gina Haspel, who is now the director of the CIA, who was rewarded for that. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me, now that the word is out, hey, you want to get promoted by Donald Trump, destroy evidence, that, we'll see that happening. So not holding my breath. I got to run. Pat, thanks a lot for the call. Joy in North Fork Valley, Colorado. Hey, Joy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, several things. One, I didn't hear you mention Saddam Hussein when you were rattling off all the many people that the U.S. government has murdered and assassinated.
All right.
So I wanted to add him in. And Soleimani, it's like shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue. If he gets away with this, he should be impeached. Another article of impeachment. I also wanted to say thank you so much for the science revolution stuff that you put up. That, yes, meat is the new tobacco. It kills us, kills the animals, kills the planet. And I think that people are waking up. It was my New Year's resolution for January 1st, 1987, no more animal products. And it's been a marvelous, wonderful journey. Exciting, delightful. It's a whole story I would love to tell you. I know you don't have
Wonderful.
time.
Yeah, and apparently stuff like Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat, the Impossible Burger at Burger King is doing really well. You know, these things are growing. So,
even people that want to eat it, there are ways. So,
there you go. Okay.
It's wonderful. Tom, thanks for everything you do.
You're welcome.
Thank you
for the call, Joy.
You're a light in a dark tunnel.
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Thank you, sir. China is already in bed with the Middle East. They built a naval base in Qatar Bay and a military-grade ammunition plant for Afghanistan people, so they wouldn't have to rely on our bullets. They could make their own. But as far as Iran, I thought Iran, during Vile W's administration, came to Vile W and said, we offer you peace, and everything's on the table, and we want to do this. And then Cheney and on the right said no, and then the people on the left said yes, and then he decided to go with the no, and he snapped that branch of olive branch and said that we're going to use it for kindling the war. And I want to know if that is true or not. I thought I heard it on your program, sir.
Yeah, here's the story. Here's the story. Bob Ney, who used to be a regular news reporter on this program, Bob Ney was a member of the United States Congress. Before that, though, he had worked in Iran for a number of years, and I don't recall if he had married an Iranian girl or not. He had relationships with people in Iran, and he spoke Farsi. He learned Farsi, which is the language that they speak in Iran. So, and he was a Republican. In fact, he was a Tea Party Republican, a right-wing conservative Republican. And Bob, because he was the only member of Congress who spoke Farsi, and the United States had no official relationship with Iran. This was back during the George W. Bush administration in the years right after 9/11. Bob received the Swiss embassy was the place that Iran was using for their relations with countries that didn't have official relations with them, like the United States. And the Swiss ambassador brought to Bob Ney, and he's told this story on this program, and he wrote a book about it, by the way, called Sideswiped. The Swiss ambassador brought to Bob Ney a letter from the government of Iran, from the Ayatollah, saying, we are willing to recognize the existence of Israel. We are ready to normalize relations with Israel. We are ready to assist you in stabilizing Iraq. We are willing to, and we're willing to just dial down all these tensions. If in exchange for that, you will normalize relationships with Iran. We would like to rejoin the nations. Now, a year or two before this happened, Bob had gone to Scotland to play golf with, what was that lobbyist's name? This, I can see his face. Anyhow, had gone to play golf with this lobbyist, and had failed to report the $4,000 or $5,000 value of that trip. Jack Abramoff. He went to play golf with Jack Abramoff, and he had failed to report to Congress the value of that trip, which the law requires. So that had happened a couple of years earlier. So anyhow, Bob Ney takes this letter from the Iranians, given to him by the Swiss ambassador, written in Farsi, which Bob can read, and knows what this letter says. He'd read it. And takes it to the Bush administration, to Dick Cheney's office, and says, here, You guys need to pay attention to this. This is an extraordinary opportunity to bring about peace in the Middle East. And Bob delivers that letter. And shortly thereafter, Bob gets arrested and thrown into prison for failing to properly file that form from that time that he and Jack Abramoff were together in Scotland playing golf. He was the only member of Congress who went to jail, as I recall, for that specific golf trip. And it immediately shut up Bob. Of course, he was in prison. He couldn't talk about it. He couldn't talk to news reporters about it. And the Bush-Cheney administration deep-sixed the whole thing. And like I said, Bob's told that story on this program many times. If you go through the YouTube archives, look for Bob Ney, N-E-Y, or N-A-Y is how he spells his last name. Is it N-A-Y or N-E-Y? N-E-Y, N-E-Y. Bob Ney and Thom Hartmann, and you'll find it. It's right out there, and it's no big secret. Ali in Seattle, how are you? What's up?
Hey, Mr. Tom. I was actually in my car listening to your radio show. Actually, you have a great show, and also I want to share my opinion.
Thank you.
In your show.
Are you Iranian?
Yeah, I am actually Iranian American living in Washington.
Okay. I would love to hear your opinion.
I was going to say what Donald Trump did was basically opening a champagne bottle for Ayatollah. He gave them back the power. People in Iran were so close to change the regime, kick Ayatollahs out. Out of nowhere, Donald Trump came and make a hero from a bad guy. Now everybody's looking at that guy as a hero.
Yeah.
He trashed all the fighting that people in Iran did. There was over 1,000 people died in protests against the Ayatollah. It was so close. It was the matter of months to kick Ayatollah out of Iran. What Donald Trump did, basically, trashing all that and, just gifting Ayatollahs back power, basically, and make Russia probably happy because the only two people right now, I guarantee you, behind the scene and behind the media, Ayatollah is like super happy right now.
Sure.
They got the power back because the whole point for them was to stay in Iran and continue governing in Iran.
Well, it's just like, George W. Bush before 9/11 had a popularity rating that was below 50%. People thought he was, an incompetent guy and that he wasn't actually elected, that the Supreme Court gave him the White House. And after 9/11, his popularity shot up to 90%. And the same thing has to be happening to the Ayatollah.
Exactly. So, like right now, my opinion, I'm not a big politics guy, but right now, Russia's happy because he got the power of the Iran last in Iraq. Ayatollah super happy because they were I'm telling you from the street of the Iran, not based on the media. People were so close to kick Ayatollah out. They were trashing their photo. They were trashing the ideology of Ayatollah. Even in Iraq, in Syria, same thing. They were burning Ayatollah's picture, throwing them to the trash. It was so close. I feel like Donald Trump is a great president for just a moment, like angry people who wants to see some result just for the moment. For the long term, he doesn't benefit nothing, not America. None of his policy is going to benefit us in the long term.
Well, he's certainly benefiting Russia, China, and Iran.
Absolutely. I'm telling you, just like a sun in the light. He gives Ayatollahs back power. He makes Russia's happy because everybody's won except U.S. and the poor people of Iran that were getting so close to get their freedom back. Russia's so happy right now because of course they don't want power of Iran. I can't believe what Donald Trump did. From the bad guy, now he become a hero, and Ayatollah super happy.
You're talking about Soleimani has become a hero now from being seen as a bad guy.
And one more last thing, Tom.
Yeah.
Iran population is over 80 million people. It's still 70 million more people are against the Ayatollah.
You're listening
I got it.
to Thom
Ali, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your comments in just a moment. It's 48 minutes past the hour. I think Ali nailed it. And welcome back. George in Palm Desert, California. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. Boy, right on it again, because Iraq is weakened and Iran is strengthened. And I just want to refer back to history somewhat, at least for the past couple hundred years. And I know I am generalizing, but the downfall of almost all empires has been war. Yeah. And I want to refer back to Vietnam. I'm from the 60s, anti-war protester, anti-draft, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote a paper in college about how stupid it was for us to be worried about the domino effect, if you remember that.
I remember it well.
Vietnam goes communist, oh my God, the whole area is going to go communist.
Okay.
And I wrote a paper saying that communism can't compete with capitalism.
Yeah.
And I remember I got an A+ on that. I still have that paper. And here we are again. It just seems that we constantly shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
You know, we do these things. We're worried about things instead of just letting history unfold, like the Iranian younger people that were starting to gain power. And now, as your previous caller just said, now Soleimani's a hero.
Right. Right, and there actually was a revolution brewing inside Iran, and George W. Bush, or Donald Trump just blew that up. George, thank you.
That once again, we blew it up.
Yeah, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. Dave in Claremore, Oklahoma. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, I was just wondering if you had heard anything about that Russian plane landing in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, yeah.
It was in the Inquisitor.
Yeah, it's the biggest, the private plane of the CEO of one of the biggest Russian banks landed just outside Mar-a-Lago, just down the road from Mar-a-Lago 3 or 4 days ago. And it was still there yesterday. I don't know if it's still there today. Of course, today is the day that Trump is coming back to D.C.
Yeah, and it said that it had landed there on January 4th of 2019. And then again landed at the same time last year, I think it said. Anyway, I was just wondering if you had heard any more about that.
No, I only saw those reports from, I didn't see any reports. And that's the reason why I didn't talk about it on this show, is that I didn't see reports about that or like that from what you would consider mainstream media, from if it had been in the Washington Post or the New York Times, I would have had no problem quoting it. But a source that I saw it from a couple of sources that I was not familiar with, and so I didn't know if it was just nonsense or if it was true. And apparently it was one of these tail spotters. There's these guys who have a hobby of tracking aircraft around the world. And of course, the travel of aircraft based on their tail numbers is public knowledge. It's publicly available. And they would go back and look at who registered that plane and where the planes were as kind of a hobby. And, plane spotting, I guess. And one of these guys figured this out.
This site that they quoted was Flight Aware.
Yeah, Flight Aware.
Is where they... Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just thought I'd check, see if you knew any more about it.
Yeah, I would love to know what happened. Why is the head of, one of Russia's biggest banks dropping in just right down the road from Mar-a-Lago just when Donald Trump happens to be there?
Yeah, and it's just spending the night, too. It flew out the next day, I guess.
No, it was there for several days. It was there for several days.
Was it?
It was still there yesterday. Okay. That was the, at least, again, this isn't mainstream reporting. This is just, guys with the binoculars, but that's what they were saying.
Yeah, right.
Dave, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's 52 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jerry in Saginaw, Michigan, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Good afternoon,
hey.
Mr. Hartmann. I have been listening to you just for not for very long. I'm going to be irregular, I guess. Well, anyway, I am a little concerned about none of the left-wing, progressive, liberal programs have talked about the book by Naomi Klein
Shock
called
Doctrine?
Shock Doctrine.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what Trump is pulling off right now. Inventing or generating a crisis that will allow him to control, scare, make us anxious, and more compliant to any mischief he may be up to.
Right.
Because he is going to follow up with something that is worse to make us more afraid. And I'm a little concerned that I haven't heard anybody talk about it.
Well, here's the problem, Jerry. The thesis of shock doctrine, and Naomi Klein, spot on. She came through Portland a few months ago, and I went to her book signing and introduced her, and she was here in the studio with us. Absolutely brilliant writer and a brilliant and decent human being. The premise of the book is that, as you said, these guys will either use an existing disaster, like a natural disaster, a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, or they will create a disaster, and then they will use that to basically, privatize the commons or, some sort of business opportunity, to basically, rob the poor and feed the rich. Trump has done kind of the reverse. What Trump did by killing Soleimani is he has solidified the powerful in Iran. He has solidified the hold that the Ayatollahs have on that country at the same time that the young people in Iran were staging essentially a revolution. 1,500 of them had been killed in the streets, 7,000 of them imprisoned. And I mean, there was an actual uprising going on in Iran. That uprising is gone now. The Iranian government is stronger. So, and in Iraq, to the extent that we were privatizing the oil fields or privatizing private industry or whatever, we're on the verge of being kicked out of Iraq as well. So, if Trump is following the shock doctrine, I don't see what Trump is getting out of this. Am I missing something here?
Secret. He doesn't let you know about it until he strikes.
I think it's just he's too stupid to do it.
But he's clever.
Yeah, I don't know. Jerry, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for taking my call, Tom. But we must not stop taking our eye off of what's happening. We're heading into fascism, and people are not talking about that much. Remember the two principles of Hitler propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels followed? A lie told once is a lie. A lie told 1,000 times is the truth. Right. Don't play toward people's intellects. Play toward their emotions. Divide, chaos, and conquer. You're right. Dictator is born in the midst of division and chaos.
You're absolutely right.
And it feeds on both for its survival. You're
absolutely right, Gwendolyn. And I'm going to have an article published probably tomorrow, maybe even late this afternoon, but probably tomorrow. I'm not sure where it'll show up. We'll send it to Common Dreams and Alternate and Raw Story and the usual suspects, Truth Dig. Basically comparing Donald Trump, what Donald Trump is trying to do, to what Viktor Orban did in Hungary. He turned, after 20 years of democracy, Viktor Orban turned Hungary in a 9-year period into an oligarchic autocracy. And Donald Trump's trying to do the same thing here in the United States. I completely agree with you. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag You're It, and tell your friends about how to find progressive media. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.